for a long time, for probably 10 years before that. So let's get right into this. Why does anybody want to use a scripting language? Well, it saves you time. You know, you can, as it says, script out common tasks can save you substantial times. And one of the questions that I ask myself on an ongoing basis is, am I doing something over and over and over? So if you find yourself doing a task repetitively, think about a way to automate that. And you can use scripting languages to do that. One of the things that you can do with scripting languages also is get reports on the status of your servers. It would be nice for a lot of us if we could get to our desks in the morning and find reports sitting there waiting for us on how things are going with our servers. Were there any problems overnight? Did any jobs fail? And with the scripting languages, you can get these reports in a variety of ways. You can get them emailed to you. You can get them HTML, so you just go to a website, and also you could just have them sitting on your printer if you wanted to. Now the talk today is about both VBScript and PowerShell, and obviously VBScript is a much older technology. PowerShell is new. PowerShell is what Microsoft is going to in the future, and if you have a choice of learning one or the other, I would strongly recommend that you learn PowerShell. As we say, Microsoft is going to be using PowerShell for all server products going forward. Right now for Exchange, Microsoft Exchange, there are things you can do in a script, in a PowerShell script, that you cannot do from the GUI. So that's going to be important. It's going to be important to be able to do that. So for PowerShell, there are some pros and cons. The pros are that it's .NET based and that it's a very powerful language. But that's also a con that it's .NET based, because all that power, all that extensibility comes with a steep learning curve, and it also comes with a lot of capabilities. It can be easy to shoot yourself in the foot with PowerShell if you're not careful. Like any scripting language, what it can do is based on your user's capabilities or how you're running it. So, you know, the script can't do anything horrible that you couldn't do yourself, but you do have to be careful when you do this. For VBScript, one of the nice things, I still have a lot of VBScript that I work with. For most systems, it works without changes. You know, if almost every system that we encounter, we can run VBScript. Some of the bad things about VBScript are that error handling, is complicated. It does take a while to write error handling. If you want to perform an action, sometimes it can take a lot of scripting in VBScript to make that happen. Another thing is SQL DMO, which was one of the strong ways that people used to connect to SQL Server databases specifically, is going away. And a lot of the examples that you find on the internet for using VBScript will be using SQL DMO. And it's going away, and SMO is replacing it, but that does require .NET, which means you have to use PowerShell. So going forward, there's going to be things that you're going to want to use for, say, SQL Server 2012. You're just not going to be able to do with VBScript. Some of the basics of PowerShell, if you haven't ever used PowerShell, is that the commands are kind of based on a verb and then a noun that's associated with that verb. So a typical command would be get service name and then browser. So we want to get the service name of the browser. .NET Framework is available. So there are many, many, many things that you can do in PowerShell that were not available to you. Anything that you can do pretty much in .NET, you can kind of find a way to do in PowerShell these days. Piping, and we'll see some examples of piping. You can take the output from one command and pipe it to another command. that's very, very handy. It allows you to do some things that you could do in the Unix-based type scripts that were not available before. And then you can use profiles to extend SQL Server. For instance, one of the modules that I use is import module SQL Server. And typically when I run, I have 6, 7, 8 of them that I import. A lot of them are SQL Server based. And there are other modules that you can import that will allow you to do things like, for instance, you can connect to other database systems. One of the things that you can do with PowerShell that was a little bit difficult with VBScript is you can manage multiple servers from a single script. And the way you would want to do this is you may have your user input the name of the server that they want to work with. You can pass parameters to a script, and one of the nice things about PowerShell is that the $args variable contains the parameters that you pass when you run a script so that you can use those within your script. You can actually read a file, and you can go out and read Active Directory. Now, as far as managing multiple servers with PowerShell, there are limitations of what you can do, but there's also some really good things that you can do. So, I would suggest you look into it a little bit, and we have some examples of connecting to servers, and you can see by some of the code that we'll look at that you can actually also connect to different servers. There are specific requirements for PowerShell. If you have SQL Server or Server 2008, you need to have SP1 installed. If you have Server 2003, you need SP2. If you have Windows XP, you probably already have SP3 installed, or you can use Windows 7 and it comes there. It's available when you install Server 2008, SP1, and Windows 7. For the other platforms, you can go to Microsoft's website and you can download it, and it's free. There's no charge for it. One of the first things that people encounter when they start using PowerShell is the first thing they want to do is they want to run a script. And you're going to find that when you first start PowerShell, you can't run a script. This is the security by default that Microsoft is pushing so much for all their products these days. So one of the things you can do, and we'll show you this here in just a little bit, is from your script you can do get-execution policy, and it'll tell you what your execution policy, and it's probably highly restricted, and then you can set your execution policy. On my system for today's demo, I have it set to unrestricted. For most people, I would suggest that you set your execution policy to remote signed. And remote signed means that you can run any script that you've created yourself, but if there's a script downloaded from the internet, for instance, it has to be signed by a trusted publisher. This gives you a little bit of protection if, somehow something downloads a script and tries to execute it on your system, it's not going to be able to. It is possible to sign PowerShell scripts. It's kind of a complicated process. You have to have a security certificate to do it. You can self-sign and create your own certificate, but that really limits you to running those scripts with that certificate on your local machine. So that's not always such a great thing. I mean, you can just leave yourself as remote signed, and then you can run the local scripts, and anything remotely would have to be signed. If you do decide that you want to sign scripts, you probably want to go to something like VeriSign, which I guess now is Symantec, and get a certificate from them. And they cost somewhere in the range of, I think, $200, $250. So if you do need to distribute them to other folks or to other systems, that's an option for you. Some of the resources that I highly recommend are the Windows PowerShell Cookbook. That's probably the single book that has been the most important to me. Another one that was a really big help to me as I started to learn, and of course I'm still learning, I've got a lot to learn, is Pro Windows PowerShell from Pressbooks. And then some of the websites. The Windows PowerShell Owner's Manual. And that's a very, very good one. It has a list of the commands there, how to use things. Probably the website I use most is TechNet Scripting Center, and that's where the scripting guys kind of hang out, and you can see the website for that there. But if you search for the scripting guys, you're going to be able to find that. Another very good website is PowerShell.com, and this is from the company Idera that makes a lot of really good database tools. But some of the examples that I got from PowerShell.com. There's some good videos, there's some good tips and examples out there. I strongly recommend all of these. One of the very nice things about PowerShell is the PowerShell extensions that have been created. So Codeflex.com has this site, SQLPSX for SQL Server PowerShell Extensions, and you can get extensions that you can load, modules that you can load that really give you a lot of extra capabilities to work with SQL Server. For instance, here's a couple commands, get-SQL data, and then you pass it the name of the server, the name of the database, and then a query, and it returns the results from that query. It's very nice. You can do a get-SQL table and then specify the database, the server name, and it will get you information about the table. Very powerful, and it really gives you the ability to do a lot of things in PowerShell and have those in scripts. I strongly recommend those. I have most of those load automatically in my profile file for PowerShell. The profile for PowerShell is really just a text file that has a special name located in a special place depending on what kind of scope you want it to have, and you put the modules that you want to load in there and it will load them anytime, for instance, PowerShell starts. Very convenient. One of the things that you can do as well is you can run PowerShell from Management Studio. So let me just take a quick break here and load up Management Studio and show you what this kind of looks like. If we come over, you can see one of the commands that you can do. This is SQL Server 2008 R2. You can start PowerShell. And this will just take a moment because it's got to load some profiles. Okay. So now you can see the default is databases. So if you do dir, you get a list of databases, and you can do cd AdventureWorks. And dir tables. And there's a list of the tables within there. I'm really not sure quite what this is useful for, to tell you the truth, to be able to just run this. One of the things that you can do if you need to run PowerShell from Management Studio is you can create a SQL agent job and have that SQL agent job run some PowerShell as well. So this is kind of handy. I'm sure this is going to be more useful in the future than it is now. But very good stuff. So let's start out by looking at a few VBScript examples. I just want to be able to show you kind of what they both look like, and we can see some of the executions. So generally I use Notepad++. This is a script. I try to leave some attributions at the top from stackoverflow.com. So this is how can I open a connection to a database and execute a stored procedure. So up here you can see you set your variables, and then we populate those variables. I created on this system a local user and a local password for that, just for the purpose of seeing how this thing worked. And then what you do next is you create your connection string. So here we're using SQL OLEDB. The source is the server name we specified, localhost. The initial catalog is the database name, and then we create that object. So we have the connection with the username, the password, and then the next thing we do is we use that connection to execute sbhelp, and then we echo back executed, and then we close that connection. So I have that set so that we can give that a little bit of a try. And you can see it returns back that VBScript.echo tells us that it executed. So one example. This is one that's a little bit more interesting. This is an example that will actually go out and create a SQL Server database. So what do we got going on here? We've got a couple variables that we're setting. The first is the size of the database in megabytes. We'll start it out as 5 megabytes. The server name is dot, which is just localhost. And then we're creating an object, and we're using a secure login. So what we're doing is here we're connecting to SQL Server with our Windows login and using the server name. So we're connecting to localhost. So here we're creating our objects, the database, the file group, the file, and the log file. And then we come down here, and here we are setting the name that we're going to call this database, the name of the data file, the physical path, and the size in megabytes, which we have set above. Then we're going to create this in the primary file group, and then we actually do the work, create the database. And let's just jump back over here real quick and refresh this and show you that that database that we're trying to create does not exist now. So we'll come back over to our VBScript. We'll do create a SQL Server database. And when we come back over here and refresh, there's the database that we just created. So pretty handy. I'm sure you can see how that could be useful. The next thing is this kind of actually uses the database that we just created. So this one is going to show us the amount of free space available for a database. Maybe a little bit more useful. Maybe you'd like to have a list of the free space in all your databases available to you in a report. So here, again, the server name is localhost. Database name we're specifying here. Doing some of the same things we did before. Secure login and setting the server name from that variable. And then what we're doing here is setting the value of that object and then running this, and then object db.spaceAvailable in megabytes is returning the value that we want to see. So let's come back over here to VBScript. And there you can see there's 4.7 some megabytes left in that brand new database that we created. One last thing from VBScript, let's take a look at this one. What this one does is lists out all the roles within a SQL Server database. So again, we're doing very much the same thing. We're going to look at this time at the AdventureWorks database. Down here, we're doing the same sort of things with our connection. And here, we're looking at object.rolename, and then we're executing, we're sending that back. We're generating that output and sending it to the screen. So let's just take a quick look at this last one. And we'll click through all these. And these are all the roles that are available within AdventureWorks. So, a couple more there. All right, so that's the VBScript examples. Next thing we should do is look at the examples for PowerShell. And one of the things to keep in mind is when you're going to use PowerShell, you have the option of using the ISE, the Integrated Scripting Environment, or using something that looks a lot like the command prompt. In either case, if you plan on working with SQL Server quite a bit, I suggest you use the .86, the x86 version. There are some of the extras, some of the add-ins that work well with the 86 version that don't work very well on the 64-bit version, no matter what you're running on as your base OS. So let's do this. Let's open up our first example. Let me adjust the screen here a little bit so we can see what's going on. Okay, this, you can see the author of this was from Idera. This is some output. This is a script I got from PowerShell.com. So what this does is goes out and does check DBs. So the inputs you can see are the server instance, the DB name, and whether you want the output to be verbose and whether you want to use debug mode. So let's just start taking a look at the script here. One of the first things you're going to see is we have this section called param. And obviously these are parameters. It's important. Param has to be the first thing that is an executable line in your PowerShell script. It has to be at the beginning. So you can see here I am setting server instance to be localhost, the database name to be AdventureWorks. We have verbose and debug in play, and the next thing we do is we start creating our functions. So here we have our main function, and what's going on in this main function is basically some error checking, or excuse me, just some checking of these switches up above. So we want verbose to be continue, and we want debug to be continue, and continue allows us extra output, and then we call the second function. So if those equal continue and that equal continue, then we'll go and we'll move through the script and call the second function. The second function that we create is the one that actually does the main work. So for instance here, this first section, this is basically our error checking. What we want to do is we want to trap any exception messages. This $_ contains the value of whatever is capable of being piped to another command right now. So it gives us kind of whatever's we're working on right now. So let's look at what we're doing next. So first thing we're doing is we're creating a connection. $CN is a variable that's going to contain our connection. So we go through this. We're creating SQL connection. Data source SQL Server instance, which we specified up above. We're using integrated security, and initial catalog is the database name. So this is going to be AdventureWorks. The next thing we do is we create a data set, and the data set is going to be called ds_checkDB. We also need to create a query, and the query is going to be dbcc checkDB AdventureWorks with table results. After we do that, we create a data adapter, and the data adapter is past the query and the connection, And then the next thing we do is we use the fill command to fill this data set with the results of the data as adapter. So the data adapter fills the data set. The next thing we do is we create a data table, and we'll call it DSCheckDB, and we want this to be the result of the data source and the table 0 from that data source. The next thing we do is we're doing some formatting here. So what we want to do is we want to do a format table. We want to auto size the columns, and we want to have these labels. So we're formatting our output here. And then the last thing we do in this script is we call that main function that we wrote up above that then calls this secondary function. So let's just take a look at that output. And we can come right up here and we can click on this and we can run that script. And you can see it's running the script. All right, let me move this screen up so we can see some of the output. And you can see this is, if you're familiar with DBCC CheckDB, this is the output from some of that DBCC CheckDB. So that's a pretty handy little script. It's very nice. The next thing we'll do is I'm going to take a look at one that generates a list of jobs that may have failed overnight. And I think you can imagine how handy this would be. So again, let's move this down so we can see. Again, this one came from the same place, so it's from Idera, from PowerShell.com. So the structure of this is very similar to the other one. And again, we're setting our parameters, local, and verbose and debug. So we have our main where we're checking those values. We come down here and we have our function list MSSQL failed jobs. We trap our errors. Now the thing here is, because we're going against SQL Server, we don't know whether these assemblies have been loaded already. So most of these actually get loaded in my startup in my profile, but we don't know that, and you can't always count on that. So these are the assemblies that are going to be required to run the rest of the stuff in this script if you did not have them in your profile. So the first thing we do is we have named instance equals new object. We're creating our object, and based on the server instance, we set the jobs variable to that named instance jobserver.jobs, and then we pipe that to where object, and this is again the contents of what we're piping in is enabled. So what this is saying is we only want to look at jobs that are enabled. We don't care about a failure on a disabled job. And again, comments start with the hash sign. And the next thing, let's go down here a little bit. And we're going to kind of loop through the jobs. So outcome equals 0. What we're doing with the outcome here is we're setting a counter so that each time we encounter a job that's failed, we'll increment that by 1, and you'll see how that occurs down there. So the thing is, we initialize that variable to nothing. And then it says, okay, did the last job, there's two parts to this one, did it fail completely, or did any of the job steps fail? So if $job.lastRunOutcome not equal succeeded, then outcome plus plus. And outcome plus plus takes that integer value outcome and adds 1 to it. So $output is job failed, job name, the result, and the last run outcome. result as the last run outcome. So we kind of go through that. We kind of loop through all the jobs with that for each job in $jobs. And then the next thing we do is we look for failures. So for each job step in job.jobsteps, so what we look for are ones that not equal succeeded. And if we find some, then again we increment that counter, and then we add to our output another line that has the job step name, the result, and the last, some other little stuff on the end there. Okay, so what we've done is we've gone through the jobs and we've gone through the steps. We've determined what failed. So now we don't know at this point whether anything really did fail, so we're testing the value of this dollar outcome. If it's greater than 0, that means we had some failures. So if that's the case, then we do this. Dollar object equal new object job.name, we look at job.last run date, and add member, here we're looking at the output. And the next thing we do is we just call the whole thing. So let's take a look at what happens when we run this. I'm pretty sure there are some failed jobs on my local box here. Quite a few. So I think you can see how that would be handy to have waiting on your desk in the morning. Let's look at another PowerShell script. I've got more PowerShell scripts than I do VB scripts because I really think people need to kind of focus on PowerShell. This one will let us know what's going on with memory on the system. So here, let me make some more room here. And again, it comes from Idera and uses the same basic setup. Thor3 is the name of this server that I'm working on. Our main function, we check the value of verbose and debug. And then for our function get MSSQL max server memory, we trap the errors like we do. That's kind of standard for all the Idera scripts. And then we initialize our ADO connection. So we do ADO open static equal 3, lock optimistic equal 3, timeout equal 3. And then we come down here, and here we're getting our memory configuration. So we have our ADO connection set to a new object of ADO DB connection. We create a record set. Here's the query that we're going to run. Select value from master.dbo.sysconfigures where config equal 1544. In here we have our connection string we're creating. So we have an OLE DB data source. We have our server name. We're telling it to look in master, and we're using integrated security. And then we set our connection timeout up here. So here we're checking our connection state, and then we're writing out whether our memory is set to max or not. And max is going to return a -1. So let's take a look at that one. And it returns a -1. And that is what my personal server is set to. Max server memory of -1 for unlimited. Let's open up the next one. Here we're going to look for some server attributes and send them to a CSV file. Again, I think this is the last one that we're going to look through from Idera, but it's pretty standard stuff. Here's where the directory where we're listing where it's going to go out, c:\webinar. Verbose and debug, that's kind of standard stuff, what we've always been doing. We're trapping our exceptions, and then we're creating a fully qualified output name. So we have our tempter plus SQL Server attributes.csv, and there's our output directory. Excuse me. So just some error checking information there. And then we come down, we load some assemblies again. If they had not been loaded in your profile, this would take care of what you need. So here we're our named instance. We're creating a new object of SMS server, passing it the server instance name, and then we're looking for the server attributes, and we're outputting it to CSV and overwriting the existing file if it's still there. So named instance, and then we're exporting it to CSV with the output file. And then we're cleaning up our variables, and we're finishing our work, doing our work with by calling main. So let me run this. And it says completed. So let's take a look out here. This is C:\webinar. You can see it was created at 9:39. It creates it as a comma-separated value file. And these are some of the attributes of the server. I want to show you another script. This one is more of an OS level type script. So let's take a look at this next one. Oops, excuse me, should be going up here. Get installed software. So this one is one that I got from the PowerShell cookbook. And again, I strongly recommend that you get that book. So what this does is it lists all the installed software on the system. Again, param is the first name, the first thing that we call. Set strict mode. Set strict mode is set to off. And strict mode, if you've programmed in VBScript or Visual Basic, strict mode is a lot like option explicit. So it forces you to set the name of variables, things like that, and some other things. It also enforces, it does some spelling checks and some things like that. So what this is next doing is going out and checking this registry key, get all the listed software in the uninstall key. So it does that, goes out and gets that registry information, and then gets the properties for those. And then for each of those, it displays the name, the display name and the publisher. So let's take a look at this. Quite a bit of stuff here. So let's make this visible. Got to grab it correctly. And you can see this is a listing of all the information about all the installed software on this system. A lot of information. There's ways you can filter that down if you're interested in seeing less. That may make more sense to you. But that's kind of an example of what you can do kind of at an OS level. Got a couple more that I would really like to take a quick look at if we do have time. I think we're got a few more minutes here, so let me load up another one.
Yeah, Mark, we do have time. We're actually moving through this really nicely, and we've got an engaged audience that obviously is really soaking this up. One question we had was about, with all these demos you're showing us or samples that you're showing us, will this be available? And I can answer that for us, that we are recording this webinar and we'll make it available to you. We'll notify you in the days following how to access this. And I also thought that while we're doing these last couple scripts, that maybe now would be a good time if folks do have questions that they can type those into their question box on the right side of their screen, and we'll queue those up and be ready to answer those after we run through another couple scripts.
And also, I'd be happy to zip these scripts up. They all have attribution of where I found them. They're all things that are commonly available on the internet. So if somebody would like some of these scripts, I'd be happy to zip them up and send them to you.
Great.
Okay. This one gets detailed information about the system. So the first thing we have is between these two symbols are some comments, and then we have the synopsis. Get detailed information about a system. It's got an example, and then again, this is the first actual executable line of the script. All this other stuff up here, you can see here begins a comment, here ends a comment, and then our first executable line is the parameter. So we've got the computer that we want to analyze as our local machine, and strict mode, version latest. What strict mode version latest means is to set it yes to strict mode and to use the strictest available strict mode. So for instance, version 1 of PowerShell had certain requirements in strict mode. Version 2 had even more, and I expect that to improve even further as things go forward. So version latest means use the strictest strict mode possible. We do have a question. Let me just pause for just a minute and say yes. I should tell you the question. Any similar PowerShell or VBS scripts for use with Oracle? I know you can do some things with Oracle and VBScript. In PowerShell, there are modules that you can load that will allow you to use PowerShell against Oracle. And it's pretty handy. It's if you're used to using the Oracle version of SQL, it's going to be a little bit different, but boy, there's an awful lot of things you can do with Oracle in PowerShell as well. So thank you for that question. So this is kind of an interesting command here. Let me highlight this in the script. What we have is the # times 80. What that means is it's going to output 80 £. So, and then it's going to output the text system information summary generated, and then it's going to do a get date to have today's date, and then we're going to have another row of £. This is going to generate a couple spaces. And then we're going to go down. We're going to do this again, computer system information. Now this is kind of cool. We're doing a get WMI object, Win32 computer system, and we're using the Windows measurement interface to get some information about the computer, and then we're doing a format list. Now format list is a pretty cool command. It takes the output and just kind of automatically creates it as a list for you so that you don't have to do a lot of individual formatting. You don't have to write a lot of code to do that. So it just, it kind of says, okay, each line of information that I get returned from this, I'm going to just format it as a list, and you'll kind of see that as we do it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at operating system information, and we're going to look at some BIOS information and memory and disk. So you can see there's kind of a wealth of information that we're going to get from this one. And I'm going to just move this up. This button here clears the output pane, just to kind of make things simpler to see. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this. Okay, and it finished. And here you can see, we're not going to look through all of this, but you can see down towards the bottom here, we have logical disk information. So I have a C drive here, tells me just a wealth of information about the file system, the name, lots and lots of good stuff that you can get. And then I have a D drive on here as well. If we go up a little bit further, we're going to see some information about the BIOS. Here's memory information. So from a Windows admin standpoint, I think it's pretty obvious that this is a very, very valuable tool. I have one more that I would really like to show you, one more script, and we're not going to actually run it. I just want to kind of go through it. This one actually takes a while to run, but I really want you to see it.
That was Tim from Pennsylvania with the question about Oracle. Thanks, Tim, for the question. And as we move through this last script, now would be a great time if any of you others have questions. You can send those in during this last script or just as it's wrapping up, and then we'll take those if there's any after the script.
Okay, thank you, Ray. This one's pretty big, so let me come down here a little bit and try to make it as big as possible. Oh, maybe I won't. Oh dear, that's the wrong one. I'm sorry. Here's where I want to be. Okay, this is one that I actually got from the TechNet Script Center site, which is where the scripting guys hang out, and it is one that I really wanted to show you because what this does is it goes out and gets some of the perfmon counters that are available through WMI and puts them into a table in SQL Server. So again, what we got up here is this is all comment because we've done a start comment. And just as information, it's giving us a create table statement that you can use in SQL Server. And this is just information, just to help you so that you can go out to your SQL Server, you can have the database where you want this, and you can create this table. Next is the information that you would need to put in a text file, and it's going to be called baseline counters myservername.txt. And if you're familiar with the counters in perfmon, you're going to notice these are all kind of the normal ones that we look at when we're doing some performance analysis. Some of them are SQL Server specific. Some of them here are addressing I/O issues, the physical disk ones. We're looking at processor, we're looking at available memory, we're looking at the amount of paging, we're looking at cache faults. All kinds of good stuff that we can return there. So again, this is just to allow you to populate a text file, and then if you wanted some different counters, you could go ahead, you could add them to this text file. Whatever you need to do. This is an example of how to run the script. Say you had an E drive, a WCN app, and a script's PowerShell, and the script name would be baseline counters.ps1. PS1 is a standard extension for PowerShell scripts. Now we're getting to the point where we can actually see what the VBScript portion of this is going to be. So gets a little bit complicated, and there are several pages of this. So we'll look at some of it. We'll hit kind of the high notes here. The name of the SQL Server is MySQL Server instance name. That's going to be populated. User ID, password. You need the database, and you need the table name. And the table name is where you're going to put the output. So you're creating an array to an array type and populating that value to 0. Again, this is very much like what we've seen before with opening a SQL connection. So we create the connection and then we open it. And then we grab the information from the input file. And the input file was up before. We build the array for the counters from that input file. And then we initialize the performance counters for the machine. And the reason you do this is if you've ever scripted out the perfmon counters, you'll notice that a lot of times the first value you get for a lot of them is going to be 0, and sometimes it's nonsense information for some of the others. This really just helps you make sure that you're getting good, clean values by initializing these. And then we increment the counter. And how many counters are we using? We determine that. We iterate through all those perfmon counters and get this information, the counter name, the category name, instance name, the value, and then we create a query, and then we insert that value into our table name that we've created. We execute the query, and then we just go to sleep for a little bit, and that's set by the value of the interval. So what this does is, I think the default for this is set to run, maybe every 30 seconds and to do 10 or 12 iterations. So what this would do would be go out and take a sample for 6 minutes, put the information in the database, and then allow you to analyze that by going back and grabbing that data. That's pretty much it for the scripts that we wanted to look at. If anyone has some questions, we have a few more minutes.
Mark, great job. We've got a very engaged audience. Almost every person that joined us is hanging on here with us right up till the end. I want to thank Jeremiah from Tulsa for your feedback. We sure appreciate that. We're glad you could be here today, as we are with everyone else. We do still have a few minutes, so any more questions, please send those to the question window. And Mark, you had mentioned that if folks wanted these scripts, that they could request those and you'll send those, and also that you were available, if they had any quick questions that you might that you've got a slide here, I think, with your contact information.
Right. So if you have a question and you just didn't want to ask it now, or if we don't get to it by the time we're done, please email me, and I'd be happy to to dig up the question, the answer to you, help you any way I can. Here is a question. How do I schedule a PowerShell script to run at a specific time? Probably the best way is to use the Windows scheduled tasks. And when you do a scheduled task PowerShell, in the program area you put PowerShell, and the arguments is the path to your script. And that one of the things that that does is allow you to run your PowerShell as a specific user, because in scheduled tasks you have the capability of saying, okay, I want you to execute as this user. So here's another question. Can I create a GUI in PowerShell? Not very easily. It's pretty tough to do. PowerShell is designed to be a scripting language. There are a lot of things, you can create message boxes, you can create things like progress counters, all that kind of good stuff. A lot of what you see now, even in things you get from Microsoft, they will create the GUI in some programming language, and in many of the things you see from Microsoft, PowerShell is really what's going on behind the scenes. We had another question about Microsoft Access. Can I work with Microsoft Access through PowerShell? Yes. There are some limitations. There are some of the things that you can do directly within Microsoft Access that are a little bit tough to do through PowerShell, but really you're just loading the provider for JET, I think it is. We have one more question. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Actually, I was just going to say, I know there's a few more questions to answer here, but I thought just as we're getting close to the end, I did want to let people know just one, to thank you, Mark. I think on behalf of our audience, we've had a couple comments about how useful this webinar was. Mark, by the way, is one member of our very skilled team of DBAs and part of our remote DBA service that you may be familiar with if you visited our virtual DBA website. That's virtual-dba.com. And that's the DBA offerings are just one element of what we do at Extivia. We also have services that include enterprise content management, business intelligence and data warehousing, portal services, and a variety of other IT services that I'm sure you could check out at our website, extivia.com. And if you have anything that's not specific to the seminar or the webinar that you have needs on or questions, you can also contact our team at info, I-N-F-O, at extivia.com, another way to contact us today. And we're coming up right on the end of the hour, but Mark, it looks like we may have time for another one or two questions maybe.
Okay. Question, can I use PowerShell to check the Windows event log? Yeah. I believe the command is get-event log, and then you can pass some parameters, so you can tell it, which one of the event logs that you want to use, and then you can actually pass some filters. So if you're looking for something specific in your event log, you can do that, and then you can have that, generate a report, send it to you in email, any of the ways that you want to do it. But I believe it's as simple as get-event log. One last question. How do I output to HTML? What you would do is you would create your output, and then you would pipe your output to something, I believe it's convert to -HTML, and that would convert the output to HTML. Okay, I think that's the last question that I have for now.
Great, Mark. Great job today. And again, thank you, everybody, folks from Seattle, New York, Florida, friends to the north, across the country. Really appreciate this. It's a great, it's something we really consider a privilege to be able to do. And keep your eye out for upcoming webinars on the Extivia website. And we'll follow up with some information on how to access the recording of today's webinar. Thanks for attending. And Mark, again, thank you for the presentation.
Thanks to everyone for attending.